Hello and welcome to the weekly Kubernetes uh, community meeting. Today is July, actually it's not July, it is June. It is June 13th, 2019, and it is a Thursday. I'm coming to you live from my traveling handbag. So thank you all for joining us. Today we have a full agenda. And before we get into the agenda, let's go through a couple of housekeeping items. Just a friendly reminder that this meeting is recorded and is currently being streamed to YouTube. So all conversations fall under the Kubernetes Code of Conduct, which says be excellent people to each other. Keep that in mind. And a couple of other housekeeping issues that we want to bring up. If you're not speaking, please mute to make sure that the people that are speaking can be heard. And one final call is a note taker. Does anybody want to volunteer to take notes? I will also go and just grab the link and put it in the chat. Fantastic. So that you can follow along with the agenda for today as well. So that gets us into the first part of the agenda, which is the demo. I would love to introduce Jim. Jim is from a company called Nemata, and he's going to be demoing Kuverno, a Kubernetes native policy management tool. The slides that Jim is presenting in the repositories are all linked in the agenda, but I will hand it over to Jim. Take it away.
All right. Thank you, Lucky. Excited to be here. So let me share, and I'm going to go into the slides. So like Lucky mentioned, what we've been working on, and something we're excited to present today is a Kubernetes policy management tool. And I'll kind of break this down and explain what we mean by this. But just quickly to introduce myself, I'm one of the co-founders at Nirmata, and some of the other folks from our team who have been working, shooting, Shiv, Dennis. So if you go to our GitHub repo, if you file a comment or ask questions on our forum, one of us will be the ones answering and interacting. So breaking down what we mean by Kubernetes native policy management, right? So there are other policy management tools out there, of course, and we've kind of interacted and looked at some of these. But what we wanted and what our customers were asking for was something where these policies became native in Kubernetes. So first off, with Kuverno, policies are custom resources. They're managed just like any other configuration in Kubernetes. You can use labeled selectors, wildcards for selecting resources the policies match on. You will see one of our features that we're working on is events to log policy enforcement. So as resource owners see what has been happening, they can easily tell when a policy has been applied. And of course, we want Kubernetes to work well with all other Kubernetes configuration management tools, which already exist and with what folks are familiar with. Just briefly, and policies, of course, it's a fairly generic term. Everyone pretty much should know what it means. But in this context, what we're talking about is configuration that's required, right? So typically, this is configuration set by a cluster operator or cluster admin, and they want this to apply. So it's something that needs to be enforced by definition, right? So it's not the same as using Kustomize or other configuration management tools where we're creating variations. But here, this is configuration which is required for governance, for security reasons, etc., by cluster operators. So what can Kuverno do, right? So the basic features, and one of the things we also saw lacking in some of the other tools out there, not only did we want to validate configurations, but we also wanted to mutate configurations, so change, set specific things in configurations as they're being accepted into the cluster. And then for namespaces, one important thing is to be able to generate a set of defaults, right? So the three features we're supporting is to validate, mutate, and generate. And validate is perhaps one of the most interesting, so we'll take a look at that in the demo more deeply. But just very briefly, what a policy is, it's a set of ordered rules. Each rule has a name, it has a message, and rules can match one or more resources. Kuverno is very flexible in terms of matching resources based on either the kind, the name, selectors. We support wildcarding. And then each rule will have either a generate block, a mutate block, or a validation block, right? So going in a little bit deeper into this, and here's an example of a policy. So in this policy, what you see, and this is, it's also straight from our docs. So it's annotated with some comments where you see we have a single rule here. This matches deployment stateful sets and daemon sets. The selector is being matched by labels. And then, of course, you can also use expressions, and then the rule would have logic to do the validation, mutation, or generating new configurations. So let's briefly look at some of the features for each of these, and then I'll show a quick demo of how this works in action. So here's a validate block, and it's basically very simple. Here, all we're saying is we're expecting or requiring a label called app to be configured. And as you see here, in addition to an overlay style YAML, what we're also, supporting in Kubernetes is the ability to use, patterns like wildcard patterns. So 0 or more alphanumeric characters, 1 or more is the question mark, and then of course also operators for, for arithmetic or other logical expressions that you want to build. Mutate blocks are a little bit more complex, and we support two different styles here in Kubernetes. So one is a JSON patch, which lets you do very precise updates to YAMLs, to configurations as required. The other is an overlay style, where again, similar to what we saw in the validation, you can describe the intent or what you need, or what you're requiring the configuration to be. And here I have two examples of overlays. One is, where we're saying if the name equals, and this little parentheses annotation, we call that an anchor. So what it's doing is it's saying if name equals secure, then I want my port to be 6443. This other example is saying if port is not defined, then default it to 6443. So there's several, and if you go through the docs, there's other things you can read there, but this is just simple logic to show what Kubernetes can do. And then finally, an example of the generate, right? So here's where, if I have a new namespace, I want to have a deny all network policy by default. Pretty simple to do. Here, I can just inline that, or we also support a copy from rule in the generate itself. All right, so with that, let me, here are some of the features on our roadmap, but let me switch to the live demo so we can see this. I'm going to go to my command line. We'll also, just from the docs itself, what I'll do is I'm going to and we'll install Kubernetes to start out with. And from there, we'll very quickly just look at some examples of policies, right? So I'm going to go to getting started, and here I'm going to use this one, to install the CRD. And also, so now I see it pulled down the CRD, it installed that, it has the namespace created. So if we do -n kubernetes and get pods, we should see the controller running. Okay, and I have some resources over here already. I'm going to show like what these policies look like. So here I have some policies already defined, checking labels, checking namespace, checking for root. And then there's also one resource we'll use as a test example, right? So this is a deployment with Nginx. So let's go ahead and import the policies. So I'm going to say create -f, and we'll go ahead and import all the policies. And now what I'm going to try and do is, use the resource and just apply that, right? So immediately what I'll see is, because of the policies that we had, specified, I see there's some success and there's one failure, right? And if you look at my YAML, so here what I have already is I have this owner label. So actually, let's remove that just as an example, right? So because I have a policy which is checking here to say that it requires a label owner, if I remove that and if I rerun the import, it's going to tell me that now that policy failed as well. But if we go back, if we put back that label, and the other thing it's asking for in the policy is it's asking for the namespace. So really all we need to do to make this pass is I'm going to give it a namespace. We'll just go ahead and use the same namespace we have. Um, and if I import this, what I should because it passed all the policies. So really, that's a very, very brief demo. There's a lot of other examples and documents available on our, if you go to our GitHub repo, we have some links, of course, in the community doc as well. Just to quickly mention some of the things we're working on before we go to a 1.0 release. So we're working on events and policy ideas to have events in each resource where policies have been applied. So you can just look at it from kubectl describe. Violations will also show up, and and the idea here is to check for existing resources. So if you do go ahead and change a policy, it will scan existing resources and tell you what the violations are. And then we're also working on a CLI to be able to, do out-of-band policy testing before you commit your changes. So really, that's all I had. Would love to have folks interact, take a look at our GitHub repo, look at our contributing guidelines and the open issues, and would love to hear thoughts and opinions.
Are there any questions for Jim? Okay, fantastic. Thank you very much for that demo, Jim. It was fantastic and very informational and insightful. Look forward to taking a look. The links are posted there, and the deck is in the agenda, along with the link to the repo that he has on screen now. Thank you, Jim.
Thank you.
That moves us to the next section of our agenda, which is the release update section. Do we have Claire on the line to provide a release update? Thanks, Claire.
Yes. Hello and happy Thursday. We are in, hopefully, the last week of the 115 release cycle. This week, we have had our first RC cut, so that should be available for anyone to test and play with. We also had our docs final PR milestone, so all of our documentation is getting finished up and ready. We're wrapping up all of the release notes as well and getting interviews lined up from the media for next week. Currently, our target cherry pick deadline is slated for today, and our target release date is slated for Monday, June 17th. We haven't entered code thaw yet, and because we haven't entered code thaw, the release color is currently yellow. We've been waiting for some failures that scalability tests were seeing yesterday to have a green run after they pushed a revert of clog yesterday. So we are giving those tests, which take quite a while to finish running before entering code thaw officially. But other than that, things are looking relatively good and stable as we head into the weekend. Cool.
Thank you, Claire. Any questions? Sorry, Claire.
Oh, I was just going to ask if there were any questions.
Okay. Thanks, Claire. That moves us to our contributor tip of the week. Do we have Jeffrey Seeker on the line? Jeff.
I am here.
Hello.
Hello. So there's kind of two parts to the contributor tip of the week. The first one was discussing the emeritus field. I'm not sure if anyone has seen this going around, but we opened it up so in owners files you can actually set emeritus approvers, and what that will do is allow someone to gracefully step down. They can still be a point of reference, however, they cannot actually approve code and they will not be assigned. But even they still might have, in-depth knowledge in the code base. This is mainly to try and help people, get more people into approvers and more people that can actually be a bit more active. So there's that. Also, it is pronounced emeritus, not emeritus. However, the second thing is, as part of the release team and SIG release, we are actually going to start putting release notes into a new dedicated website. We will link it in the notes and in the stream, but it is relnotes.kates.io. So for 115, we're going to keep the entire change log in the markdown file and also have the relnote site live, and then eventually start moving more and more things into the relnote site. We realized that 30 pages of markdown and, PR logs is kind of cumbersome to try and consume and filter. So trying to build out this site is definitely going to, I think, help a lot of people. And that's me. Any questions? I'm going to link a whole lot of reference stuff too.
Thanks, Jeff. Moving right along to SIG updates. Do we have Steve Wong from Sig VMware?
Yes,
sorry, Janet, we flipped it around. Steve's going to go first.
Okay, I just shared. Can you see that?
Yes, we see it. Thank you, Steve.
Okay. Hi, I'm Steve Wong, co-chair of the Sig VMware, which is charged with the cloud provider for running Kubernetes on top of the vSphere hypervisor, as well as supporting other VMware infrastructure that might come into play when running Kubernetes. So what we did last cycle, by last cycle, this is the last report at the community meeting, which was in mid-March. We updated the out-of-tree cloud provider. We're now up to a version 0.20. It's beta, but as far as we know, this is now stable. So that, if you were to contemplate using it for something you care about, it's not insane. The last update had some CSI integration related changes. I think this is true of all out-of-tree cloud providers, that they're moving to use the out-of-tree storage CSI as well. And we've got test improvements compared to the prior version. On the storage front, we had a major upgrade to the docks just recently. The link is here in the slide. We released a newer version of the CSI for vSphere, that's version 2. As it turns out, at the recent KubeCon Europe, our SIG session was devoted to coverage of this CSI storage driver. So I'd encourage you to follow the links to the SCED site. There's the deck there and a video recording. It covers things like how to configure, how to install, how to troubleshoot, and we had good attendance at that, but I'd encourage you to go look at that presentation for more. Finally, on the cluster API front, we've had a working cluster API provider for vSphere, but a decision was made to make this aligned with the cluster API for AWS, and the last release was March 29, but there's activity going on. So for upcoming cycles, we're planning on bringing that out-of-tree cloud provider to a stable release. We've got upcoming updates to the CSI for vSphere storage driver, including some of these are probably distant, meaning second half of the year, but we're intending to pursue the snapshot features that are underway in SIG storage now. We think that we'll move this up to a beta release in the next couple of weeks. And in queue, we've got support planned for resizing of already provisioned volume snapshot support, implementing a plugin for the Valero open source backup project, supporting read, write, many, and volume cloning. I already mentioned on the cluster API front, we're planning on aligning more closely with the AWS cluster API provider. Oops, something happened there. Okay, related KEPs. I'm not going to read these to you, but go back in this deck and you can find the KEPs for the background on this activity that's going on now. Related working group status, we've got 2 working groups under the SIG right now, one for the cloud provider, and at those cloud provider meetings, we're also covering the CSI storage driver. It meets first Wednesday of every month. The recorded meetings are up on YouTube and the notes are there at that link. Then similarly for the cluster API provider, those meetings are every 2 weeks. Next one, June 17. And we've got meeting notes online as well as YouTube recordings of the meetings. We've got one issue that's tagged as help wanted. And it's here if anyone is interested. Where to find the SIG overall. Our Zoom meeting is Thursdays, 11 a.m. It's right after today's meeting. And we've got links there. One other note I wanted to bring up is that we are planning on aligning with the cloud provider's plan to fold the cloud provider SIGs as working groups underneath cloud provider. So we're anticipating doing that. The time frame is second half of the year. And another thing that I want to mention is that those cloud provider working groups folded under cloud provider will cover developer activity, but in the VMware SIG, we are fielding user requests for support and guidance. And we're intending to try to get some users to put forth a proposal to start what might be an inaugural user group to pick up some of the activity that has been going on underneath the VMware SIG in the form of a user group. Anyway, that's it. Any questions?
Thank you, Steve. There is a link to Steve's Sig VMware deck in the agenda if you'd like to follow up and read that. And with that, I will turn it over to Janet from Sig Apps. You have the floor, Janet.
Thank you. Can you see my screen?
We see it. Thanks, Janet.
Thank you. So we're Sig Apps, and the first update is that we have a new chair, and it's me. I'm going to be the new Sig Apps chair. And then what we did last cycle, we add more support for PDB. PDB now supports custom resources. And also PDB is now mutable. So it will be merged into 115. So before this, we know that PDB might have a race condition between eviction to be called, but then we figured that users can easily delete and recreate PDBs. So to make it easier for users to use, we decide to relax the immutability. So now you can modify PDBs. And then we recently found an issue in which is introduced in 112. It's an incorrect defaulting of a field in pod template, actually pod spec, which is part of pod template. And then it causes unexpected rollouts after you upgrade to 112. So just take a look at the fix. There's a cherry pick into the 112 and all the following releases. So before you upgrade, just make sure you have the new fix. And then our ongoing work. So most workloads APIs are GA, and the remaining one is cron job. We're moving it to GA. And the PDB, the pod disruption budget API that I just mentioned, is currently beta, and we're moving it to GA as well. And then we have several interesting caps. For example, the sidecar containers. If you are familiar with it, it's a it's a sidecar container concept that you can run a sidecar in a sidecar container in the same job, in the same pod. But then an issue that we found is that when you're running a job with sidecar container in it, then when your pod terminates, the main container terminates, the sidecar won't be terminated with it. So there's a fix for that. And then also a cap for stateful volume expansion. So with this, you can resize your stateful set. And then max available for stateful sets. And then the last one is the stateful application data management. It's a proposal for introducing a bunch of new CRDs for you to do data management for your stateful applications. For example, you can do snapshot or fill apps, and then you can do restore, and you can go to those caps to find out. So I'll update these slides to include the links to those caps. And then for cron job to GA, the API is pretty much stable, and we're just trying to update the controller to make it more scalable. Because right now it's not using Informer framework like other controllers. So it has to do a list call to the API server for listing all the jobs. And it's not very efficient if you have a lot of cron jobs or jobs in your cluster. So we're trying to improve that and then have cron job to GA. And then for application controller, it's another sub-project that we have in Sig Apps. You can find the link here. And then it's about a CRD that groups a bunch of resources together as a group for you to, as a unit for you to do, for example, garbage collection, or you can show them in the UI or in CLI. And then you can also use the controller to get the status of the whole app. And it also supports adoption from using the label selector feature. And then this is the last slide, how you can contribute. And we are looking for people to help us contribute to workloads APIs, the cron job to GA plan. We have a cap out. We're still looking for people to help us implement it. And then the max available for stateful set and the stateful set volume expansion, those are both caps. And then the PDB GA plan. So where you can find us is you can go to the community repo and then find Sig Apps, or you can go to our channel and we have mailing list. Thank you. Any questions?
Thank you, Janet. And I just want to give everybody a thanks that brought the SIG updates today. 2 great updates from SIG VMware and SIG Apps. Thank you, Janet and Steve. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Moving on to the announcement section of the agenda. So I'm going to go through all the announcements that we have and then open it up at the end if there's anything not written down that people would like to add. So first announcement, we have congrats to Bob Killen. Is Bob on the line? Congrats, Bob, for joining the GitHub admin team. And that is from Aaron Krickenberger. Thank you, Aaron, for calling that out. And thanks. Yeah, go ahead.
Give some quick color to that.
Yeah.
So I was just doing some digging. First off, also huge thanks to Caleb Miles for graduating to emeritus status to make room for Bob for this. This also means that the GitHub admin team now has somebody in an East Coast time zone. So we're spreading our time zone diversity. And a huge thank you to Bob, because in looking through the stats, probably 200 of you have had some form of interaction as he's added over 219 people to either the Kubernetes or Kubernetes SIGs or other orgs. So huge shouts to Bob. Thanks.
As I just typed, Bob is unfortunately hunting down an electrical problem, so he is not on the call. But I will play Bob in his stead since I am close enough to him.
Thank you, Aaron, and thank you, Jeff. Office hours next week. So there is a link to the live stream. Click the bell for a reminder so that you get that up on your YouTube when the live stream is live. Help by retweeting. So there's a link in there that you can retweet. So help raise awareness to the live stream for office hours is going on. And we're looking for a West Coast streamer so that we can do a Western session. Ping George Castro if you want to help. I kind of like the West Coast streamer vibe there. So if you're on the West Coast, you're looking to stream, hit up George Castro. Now moving on to shout outs for the week. So there is a shout outs channel in the Kubernetes Slack. If you haven't seen it, go and take a look. There are lots of great feedback where people are congratulating each other for work that they've been doing in the community. I'm going to call out some highlights. So at Vince Pry, huge shout out to D Hellman and D Watt for taking 1+ hours today to give great feedback about the Cluster API Bootstrap proposal and helping move the project forward. Thank you. At Algea, big shout out to Ben the Elder for having a working IPv6 CI in kind. Thank you. At Jay Burkus, huge shout out to Catherine for automating a release team role out of existence, plus all the other test infra folks who helped. So thank you, Catherine, and thanks, Josh, for calling that out. And J. D. Tiber, shout out to Justin SB for cutting the Cluster API v0.1.2 bug fix release. So thank you for your hard work there. That brings us to the end of our stated agenda. I will now open up the floor. Do we have any other announcements that need to be made? Okay, lazy consensus says no. Fantastic. So thank you all for joining the Kubernetes Weekly Community Meeting, and have a wonderful Thursday wherever you are on this beautiful planet. Bye-bye.
Happy Thursday.